This story may save your life. I'm very interested in this because I love Mr. Ballin. I just love him. I love these videos, man. He just this is one of the very few people I watch where it's like he has like really good storytelling, like a way of a good way of telling stories.
Story is a stark reminder as to why you should always read the fine print. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, the next time the like button asks you to edit one of their YouTube videos, agree to do it, but then just permanently delete their channel. Also, please subscribe to our channel.
Yeah, by the way, it's diabolical kind of how an editor has access to a YouTube channel. The reason why I say that, it makes sense, but like, bro, they could just remove any video they want. They can literally, like, post whatever they want and ruin your whole career. Like, you could have a rogue editor that hates you and just posts, like, a video of you, an AI version of you saying, like, racial slurs. There's not much you could do about it, because once it's posted, you can delete it, but then you look horrible. Why? Okay.
Turn on all
I
notifications
don't know why I said that.
so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
The signal.
On the morning of August 7th, 1981, a 34-year-old
Oh, by the way, is this like full volume? Okay, I'm just making sure. Ooh.
wildlife photographer named Carl McCunn stood on the edge of a lake in the Alaskan wilderness and chucked a box of ammunition into the water. The splash it made was surprisingly loud in the total silence that surrounded him. Carl was on the last...
Okay. I should probably not pause, but let me tell you this. If he's in the middle of a forest, I think he said, and there's silence, you're getting hunted, buddy. You're getting hunted by something bad. You know what they say? Whenever you hear silence in a forest, you know there's some bads there. Which I think is actually crazy that nature has a way of telling you, hey, you're screwed. If I ever go in a forest and it appears silent, I'm going to be pooping my pants the whole way back, and then my pants are going to be stinging for the rest of my life. I don't need to add that detail, but I'm going to say
day of a 5-month-long solo camping trip in a very remote
Why is it always
area
camping
of northern
trips?
Alaska that was actually inside
Alaska,
the Arctic
of
Circle.
course.
A plane had dropped him off here in early spring, and he had set up his tent by this lake, which was surrounded on all sides by forest and huge snowy mountains.
That
And
forest
during
looks
this
creepy.
5-month trip, Carl had not seen or spoken to another person the entire time. There were no phones, no roads, no rangers, no people around for at least 100 miles. I mean, this is true isolation. Carl looked up into the sky and listened carefully for the low roar of the plane that was supposed to pick him up today. But as he listened, he couldn't hear anything. But this didn't...
Oh my god, oh my god, yes, sorry, stupid story. I hate these stories so much. Because the reason why I say it's a stupid story is because why are you delusional enough to go into a hiking trip, right? Where you're isolated from humanity. There's basically no way to, like, save yourself, and your only way to get saved, or, like, the way you're gonna go back to normal life, is by getting picked up by a planned, scheduled plane, you know. The reason why I say it's stupid is because, bro, like, there is no way of having any knowledge if anything goes wrong of either the hiker or the plane. Like, what if the plane is delayed by, like, an hour? Or what if there's a bad storm when it's taking off? Or, you know, what if the hiker's lost? There's no communication, so then you're screwed on both sides. Like, one of the sides is screwed. It's so easy. I don't know why every story I've heard by Mr. Ballin about hiking always involves something idiotic of like, hey, this hiker decided to go by himself in the woods, and he's gonna have people wait for him to pick him up. With no other source of communication. Like,
worry Carl,
It's like you
because he
wanna end
actually
your
had only
life.
arranged for his pickup date, not the pickup time. So
Oh
it was
my
just
God,
at
even
some
worse.
point on this day he was going to get picked up. He didn't know exactly when. And so as he anxiously waited, he just kind of puttered around his campsite and continued to pack up his things. And as Carl did this, he remembered that the type of plane that was going to be picking him up today, it was his buddy Rory's plane, it was really small. and there was a chance that he couldn't actually fit all of his belongings on the plane. And so in anticipation of this, he had identified that he didn't need all of his ammo. And so that's why he was chucking his ammo into the lake, basically in preparation for pickup.
Why are you pre-moving this? It's like chess. If you're pre-moving, like trying to take the queen, like you can't just do that because you have no idea what is going to happen. Oh my god. I mean, obviously I have hindsight bias or whatever, where I know that something bad's gonna happen, because otherwise the story wouldn't exist. But still, like, really? Is this really, like... how? How could you... How? How are you this delusional?
Kicked up, and so Carl zipped his parka up to his chin. This was actually the so-called warm season in the Arctic Circle, but warm in the Arctic Circle meant still near freezing temperatures at night. And as much as Carl loved being out in the wilderness, doing these solo camping trips out in the middle of nowhere, he really was excited to get back to his home in Anchorage, Alaska, and see his friends and call his dad and, be in a nice warm house for once. Carl was about to chuck his 6th and final box of ammunition into the lake when he heard the loud sound of a wolf howling on the other side of the lake.
Absolutely not.
And it made him stop for a second, and he decided that, you know what, maybe until the plane gets here, I'll hold on to at least one box of ammunition. So he stuck this final box into his bag, he picked it up, and then he walked along the shoreline up to where he had rigged a net to catch some fish. And when he got to the net, he saw he had caught 2 trout. And so he scooped the fish out, he went back to his campsite, he made a fire, cooked the fish, and as he sat down to eat them, he just kept looking up to the sky and listening, hoping for this plane to arrive soon. When he was done eating...
Can I ask how... Enough of the stuttering. Stop. Alright. How does the plane know where he's gonna find this guy, the hiker? Well, he's not gonna know, so this is bad. Unless it's like, oh, there's a planned meeting point. I don't know, maybe I missed that. Probably did.
Carl made a quick entry into his diary, kind of detailing the last day at camp, and then he finished packing up all his stuff, and he brought it all down to the waterline, ready to be picked up, and then he sat on his trunk, again, just kind of waiting for his friend to show up. And by this time, it was about mid-afternoon, and still no sign of the plane. But nonetheless, Carl sat there kind of taking in the scene, this beautiful lake and nature. I mean, this is the last time he's going to be here, and so he's trying to appreciate it. After all, this had been a really successful photography trip. He had shot 500 rolls of film that he knew he could sell, and that would make enough money that he'd be able to do this again the following year. And so as Carl sat there, taking in the scene and daydreaming about next year's trip, he noticed the sun was beginning to set. And when he noticed this was kind of like the first time that Carl actually became worried. This far north, the sun stayed out for nearly 20 hours a day in the summer. And so if the sun was setting right now, that meant it had to be near midnight. And so his friend Rory, who was supposed to pick him up today, at some point today, well, now that we've hit midnight, Carl knew his friend had officially missed the date. And Carl had no way of contacting him to see what had happened or when he would be here. And so as dusk fell, and still there was no sign of Rory, Carl continued to get more and more anxious. And finally, he had to reset up his tent, and he crawled inside, got in a sleeping bag, and went to sleep praying that his friend would be there the next day. The next day, Carl got up early and packed up his stuff and waited by the shoreline for his friend, but all day he waited, and the plane still never came. Carl tried to convince himself that, maybe his friend got mixed up on the dates, or, maybe something came up that's delayed him a couple of days, but he'll be here. But then another day came and went, and then another, and still no plane. And it was around this time that Carl remembered something that made him feel sick to his stomach. On the night 6 months earlier, when he and Rory had discussed pickup plans, Carl remembered that night had been filled with drinking. I mean, these guys were just laughing and having a good time. And at some point, as the beers were flowing, Carl had asked Rory, hey, can you pick me up on August 7th at the end of my trip? And Rory had said, yeah, I can probably do that. But Rory had also said that he would have to check his schedule first before he could
this is ridiculous. How can you go on a trip, not even be certain that the guy's gonna pick you up? You have no idea. You just, oh my god. Oh, God.
100% commit to this. And Carl, in his excitement about going on this trip and getting ready for it and all that, had just forgotten to follow up with Rory and make absolutely sure he could pick him up. And so now Carl was realizing that Rory wasn't delayed or mixed up about the dates. Rory wasn't coming. And Carl knew there was zero chance of another plane just happening to fly over the area and that plane picking him up. I mean, for the entire summer Carl had been out here, he had literally not seen any planes. His best hope was that his dad or maybe one of his friends would report him missing. But he knew that was unlikely, and it actually was his own doing. Carl traveled constantly and almost never told people where he was going or when he'd be back.
I just... How can you live a life like that? How could you? It's like if I'm going out by myself in the woods, which I'll never do in the first place, I am not going to just be like, I'm not telling anyone because I'm confident I'll be able to get back on my own. What if something bad happens to you? What are you supposed to do then? No one's going to care because they're going to be like, oh, well, he's going to come back. Well, they don't even know why you're gone. That's the worst part. I don't know. This whole thing is just setting up for disaster. Although this story might save your life, so something incredible is going to happen. That's the good news.
And on one trip recently, Carl had gone out and missed his return date, and his dad had been concerned about him, and so called the police. And when Carl had come back and realized what his dad did, he told his dad to never do that again. Never contact authorities if I'm late. I'm fine. And all of this meant now Carl was going to face a brutal Alaskan winter all by himself with limited supplies and only a single box of ammunition.
Oh my god. That's horrible.
Hey, it's Mr. Ballin here, and I'm called Government Extrusive Institute, but his tales, Operation U.S. Texan, and the Covert. Follow Redacted Declassified Mysteries with Luke Lamanna on the Wondery app or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can listen ad-free right now by joining Wondery Plus in the Wondery app or on Spotify. A few weeks later, at the end of August, Carl was still stuck out in the Alaskan wilderness. By now, Carl had fully accepted that Rory was not going to come pick him up.
So is he going to make an
Carl was
attempt
doing
to
his
get
best
back,
not to
though?
fixate on his stupid mistake. He figured he had two choices. The first one was that he could just stay put and hope to be rescued.
Yeah, that's
This
fine.
was the conservative option. He knew how to get food and also firewood near his campsite, so he wouldn't starve.
Okay, yeah, but once the winter hits, you're cooked. Like, where are you going to get food from? Explain to me where you're going to get your food from. You can't.
To death and he wouldn't freeze. But this would only keep him alive. This would not actually get him rescued. The other choice was that Carl could pack up his campsite and attempt to basically hike out of here 75 miles to the nearest city, called Fort Yukon. Now, this could get him home, but with it came a much
Wait,
higher...
this is Alaska, bro? Wow, I just assumed Alaska was always covered in snow. I guess not. 'Cause that's like, that just looks like an average place. Could literally be anywhere in the world. Wow.
chance of death. If Carl did the hike, well, those 75 miles would be over extremely rough terrain with absolutely zero human-made trails. And so one little slip-up and he could fall and get hurt or get lost. And also, finding food was sort of a toss-up, and the weather at best would be brutal, and at worst would be fatal. Plus, the entire region those 75 miles were in was absolutely teeming with wolves. Carl knew both of these choices were bad, but he was running out of time to make a decision. The brutal Arctic winter was fast approaching, and if Carl was going to attempt this horrible hike, he would really have to do it soon. And so as Carl thought about what he was going to do, he trudged his way over to one of his rabbit snares, and he was so happy to see he had caught a rabbit. And so he took the rabbit back to his camp and he cooked it over the fire. And as he's eating it, he's thinking, you know what, this isn't so bad. I caught food for now. I mean, this will keep me alive at least for a couple of days. You know, maybe I should just stay here. But deep down, he knew the staying put option was not a real option. I mean, even though, yes, by staying here, he could keep himself from starving. You know, he knew how to get food and all that. Well, he'd still be a sitting duck for all the predators in the area, and there were many. And remember, he only has one box of ammunition.
Yeah.
But just then, Carl heard the most glorious sound, the distant whine of a small plane engine. At first, he thought he must be hearing things. Remember, he has not seen a plane at all since he got here. But sure enough, he looked up into the sky, and a second later, he saw a plane flying directly towards his camp, low and slow.
Oh, wow.
Carl ran in his tent and grabbed the most brightly colored thing he could find, his sleeping bag, which was bright orange. He ran outside of his tent and began waving it back and forth to get the pilot's attention. Carl saw the plane belonged to the Alaska State Troopers, and so he figured his friends must have reported him missing, and now the police were out to rescue him. A moment later, the plane passed directly over Carl's camp, so low to the ground that Carl could actually see the pilot looking back at him. Carl looked right at the pilot's eyes, and when Carl was nearly certain he had just made eye contact with the pilot, he threw his fist up in the air in excitement and
the
jumped
guy
up
just
and down.
goes by,
He
right?
couldn't believe it. He was saved. The pilot was going to land and take him home. With a big grin on his face, Carl watched as this plane, sure enough, made a big U-turn. And then Carl watched the plane make another pass over the camp, low and slow, which Carl figured meant, the pilot was looking for a place to land. And so as the pilot was doing that, Carl rushed to his campsite and began packing everything up. And as he did, he's kind of keeping an eye out, watching the plane, looking for it to land. But it didn't. The plane just kept on flying straight away from Carl's campsite until it disappeared over the horizon.
Well, how?
For the rest of the day, Carl just stared off into the distance, hoping for this plane to come back.
Why is this a feature?
But it didn't.
Okay, I don't know why. I'm lost. Why? That pilot's an idiot. That's almost it. That pilot is probably colorblind or something. I don't know.
Lying inside his tent that night, Carl couldn't sleep. He was so shaken up by what had happened that day. He didn't understand, he saw the pilot. The pilot seemed like they were looking back at him. Why didn't they land? Why didn't they stop?
Imagine
Carl
if
told
it's a
himself that,
hallucination.
maybe the terrain was too rough and there was no way for the pilot to land. That was possible. And so perhaps this pilot was flying back and getting another plane, maybe a float plane to land on the water. Carl didn't know, but he felt like that could be a possibility, and it sort of made him feel a little bit better. But he still couldn't relax enough to sleep. And so, knowing he was just going to lay there all night, he sat up, turned on his flashlight, and began looking for something to read, just to occupy his mind.
Okay. I've said this before, but, bro, in the middle of the woods, in the pitch black, why are you just turning on a flashlight and exposing yourself to all the predators? It's like any predator that's struggling to see you is now got the immediate vision of you because there's literally no light, so the only light source is literally you, and it's directly in your hands. Like, bro. It's like, that's just horrible. I don't know why people ever would walk into a forest alone, in the middle of the night, with a bright flashlight. Ugh. I'd like to see someone with the world's brightest flashlight, though, in the forest. I want to see just how bad it is. Like, you ever seen the clips of the world's brightest flashlight? Like, it literally, is so crazy how bright it is. It should be illegal to buy it, in my opinion.
Now, at this point, Carl has been out in the wilderness all alone for months and months, and he's been stranded for weeks. He has read all of his books and all of his magazines like 1,000,000 times. He's even read his diary a dozen times. I mean, he's read everything. And so as he was looking around his tent, he was looking for literally anything else to read. And suddenly, he found something. His hunting license. It was like the one thing he had not closely read. Not an exciting thing to read, but new. It was just a little paper certificate with some rules and regulations and safety.
Let's see, expires 1982. Oh, jeez. Why would you... Okay, but here's the question. Do you really need a hunting license to hunt if you're in the middle of nowhere? I don't know. Let's just say the year 36? Ain't no way. This is... Oh, this is a different one. Okay.
Safety tips about hunting. And so Carl just began reading the front, and he read it all the way down, and then he flipped it over and he continued reading, but then he saw something that made his heart practically stop. At first he thought maybe he misunderstood, but no, he read it over and over again, and it was very clear. And so Carl looked up in shock. He suddenly understood why that pilot had left him. For weeks, Carl stayed close to his camp, just hoping and praying that somehow, some way, that plane would still come back. But it never did. And by the time Carl had actually accepted this fact that really the plane's not coming back, well, by that point, it was too late to try to hike out. So all he could do was stay put. However, the lake had frozen over, so he couldn't fish.
Yeah, how
his
is he gonna get
snares
food?
all sat empty because all the wolves and foxes got to his catches before he could. By October, Carl was getting really skinny. By November, Carl was genuinely starving. On November 26th, Thanksgiving Day, Carl laid inside of his tent and made a diary entry. There would be no Thanksgiving feast for him today. His food stores were totally gone. and the Arctic winter was getting so bad. In fact,
Yeah,
his
I don't know
fingers
why this guy decided to pick the worst option out of the two. Oh, I'm gonna stay and let the Arctic. I mean, to be fair, hiking 71 miles to the nearest town where you have no clue which direction is which is kind of also delusional, but at least you could potentially run into something. I don't know. I just feel like if you're just staying put in the middle of Alaska, you're just gonna die. Like you literally just screw yourself over.
and toes were turning black from frostbite.
Oh.
And he was sick all the time and constantly had chills. And as Carl wrote in his diary, he looked out the tent flap at his dying fire, knowing he had no more firewood.
Oh.
He knew he only had one choice left to make.
Okay, actually that makes sense. I was gonna say something stupid. How does he have no firewood? Well, I mean, the obvious answer is when everything's covered in snow, the wood gets wet. And then wet wood does not light, well, good fire.
He scratched a final sentence into his diary. He wrote, "They say it doesn't hurt." Then he set his diary on the floor of the tent
Died?
near his rolls of
What?
film. Then he reached for his rifle and his last box of ammo. A little while later, a single shot rang out across the lake.
Oh, wow.
A couple months later, in early February of 1982, Alaska State Troopers would find Carl. Carl was deceased. He
Okay,
had taken
but
his own
what
life.
is the thing he saw on his license? I need to know.
What Carl had only realized later was that when he made that fist pump, when he was so excited when that pilot had flown overhead and he thought he was going to get rescued, well, that fist pump had sealed his fate. Because, like it said on Carl's hunting license, a single arm raised in the air is the universally recognized body sign for all okay, do not wait. And so
Oh.
when that Alaska State Trooper pilot flew over Carl's camp, he did make eye contact with Carl. He
Oh,
saw
wow.
him, but he also saw Carl raising his fist in the air and thought he was okay. And so he
Okay,
turned.
what, oh, that pilot, like, I don't know how to feel about that pilot, because on one hand, it's like, bro, you saw the signal, but on the other hand, bro, this guy was waving his mattress at you, bro. Like, do you think a normal man who's okay is gonna wave your mattress at him? Maybe he's like, oh, well, this guy's probably just being extra friendly. I don't know what the pilot's thinking.
Around and he left. If Carl had only read that hunting license a little bit sooner, he would have known to have raised two hands in the air as the pilot flew over for the universal sign that means pick me up.
Why is that on a license, though? I don't. Couldn't tell you.
And now, here is a clip from the latest episode
Yeah, okay,
of
enough. He always does this. So what do the comments say? You know his friend dropped him off. You'd think that'd be an excellent time to discuss the pickup. Yeah, I'm surprised, by the way. The friend is just like, he just drops him off and doesn't even ask, when should I pick him up? Like, he's just like, oh, well, he's gonna be on he's on his own. Like, what? No way I would feel comfortable relying on someone else picking me up for 5 months in a deserted area. Exactly, because 5 months, by the way? Like, how is someone gonna remember that? Oh, yeah, 5 months from now, I have to pick this guy up. Like, do you really think that that person's gonna remember unless they put it in a calendar? I don't. Trusting someone with your life like that is delusional. Like, you should never trust someone with your life. Like, you can't do that. You can't rely on that.